Hello, and welcome to Stories from India, a podcast where we talk about myths, legends, and folk tales from India. I am your host, Narad Muni, and I'm a mythological character myself. I have the gift of eternal life and knowledge of the past, the present, and the future. By profession, I'm a traveling musician and a storyteller. So, the way I'm doing my job is by podcast. In this episode, we are back into the Mahabharat. Like most episodes on this show, you need not have heard any of the previous ones. But it may help if you want more context. Check out the links in the show notes for the earlier Mahabharat episodes. Here's the story so far. Shantanu, the emperor of Hastinapur, together with the river Ganga, had a baby boy, Bhishma. The boy would have been crowned emperor, except he blew it all away just so that Shantanu could marry Satyavati. Satyavati was a ferry operator on the river Yamuna. Her father would only agree to his daughter's marriage to the Emperor of India if Bhishma renounced his claim to the throne and promised never to have children. The foolhardy and rash young man that he was, Bhishma made that promise. Over time, Shantanu and Satyavati had a couple of boys, but tragedy continued to hurt the empire. As first, Shantanu passed away, and then Chitrangad, the older child. With no other choice, Satyavati's younger son, Vichitravirya, was crowned emperor, even though he was just a little boy. Bhishma also took the extraordinary step of kidnapping three prospective queens for Vichitravirya. But the curse struck again. Vichitravirya passed away, childless. The big question confronting Satyavati and Bhishma was the same one that had plagued Shantanu several years earlier in the story. Who would be the next emperor? Bhishma was Shantanu's son, but he had promised that he would never sit on the throne. We'll begin the story in the throne room. But the room did not have the usual crowd of hundreds. There were just two people and an elephant in this room. Bhishma and Satyavati looked at each other. This last month had not been easy on them. Vichitravirya wasn't just Bhim's half brother and Satyavati's darling son. He was emperor. With him gone, there was no one to succeed him. The people of Hastinapur were not buying government issued bonds anymore. Bhishma had promised not to sit on the throne, and the only remaining members of the royal family were Satyavati and the princesses, Ambika and Ambalika. You know, we don't need an emperor. We could just make you empress, said Bhishma. They looked at each other and burst out laughing. I needed that, said Satyavati, finally. Only a joke like that about the hopelessly patriarchal society we live in could have distracted me from this gloom we've been living in the past month. I couldn't have put it better myself, Mother, said Bhishma. But back to business now. We must find a successor. I'm telling you again, Bhishma. You could marry and have kids, said Satyavati. Why are you still sticking to your promise? No one will have to know anything. I'll pretend the children are adopted. No, mother, said Bhishma. A promise is a promise. I'd sooner let the empire collapse into ruins than for future historians to think I reneged on a promise. That's terrible logic, said Satyavati. But I'll let it slide. She paused. What about Balik? She was referring to Shantanu's older brother. Normally, he would have been next in line. But Balik was the type of royal who preferred to stay away from administration. If he had the option, he would have formally renounced his title, done a Netflix deal, and gone on to the Oprah Winfrey show. Bhishma said so. Besides, Balik wasn't qualified because it would have to be a descendant of Satyavati's on the throne. That was part of Bhishma's promise too. I have no choice then, said Satyavati. Bring me Vyas. Vyas? The Rishi? The Vyas? Asked Bhishma, surprised. The one who authored this epic we are a part of? The very same, said Satyavati. I'm afraid I have no choice but to reveal a secret that I've kept hidden most of my life. Vyas is my son. Bhishma was shocked. What? I'm sorry, Narad? Who wrote today's script? Yo, Narad, do you even have the lines right? I nodded and mimed for him to continue. Bhishma grumbled and muttered something about sounding like an afternoon television soap opera rerun, with a liberal amount of extra K's sprinkled in the title, which would probably be called Kyunki Rishi Bhi Kabhi Beta Tha. But despite his grumbling, he did go to Vyas's ashram. Vyas was waiting for him. Do you know why I'm here? Asked Bhishma. Yes, brother, said Vyas. I've been waiting for you since episode 84. It's about time. Vyas picked up his briefcase and with Bhishma began the journey back to the palace. And along the way, Vyas explained what was going on. It turned out that his dad was not Shantanu at all. My dad is Parashar. Not ringing a bell, said Bhishma. Grandson of Vashishta, author of the Vishnu Puran? Never mind. All that matters is that Parashar and Satyavati met one day when he was crossing the Yamuna in her boat. They went out, and eventually she had me. Parashar raised me up all by himself. His life's an interesting one. I'm sure Narad will cover that story in a future episode. They got back to the palace. Satyavati received her son warmly. For someone who was meeting his mother for the first time since she gave birth to him, they got along quite well. Vyas had come prepared. I know what you need, Mum. I brought along my baby assembly kit right here. He pointed to his briefcase. All I need is some forms to be filled in. I have all the equipment ready. Questionnaire, consent form, cauldron, test tubes. How does this work? Asked Bhishma, mystified. Have you ever been to the mall, Bhishma? Asked Vyas. Have you seen one of those Build-A-Bear stores where parents pay a crazy amount of money to have their child assemble a teddy bear? Same concept, except I'll do it much better. These are real living beings that I create, not like those lifeless teddy bears. Fair warning though, we only have one shot at this. Vyas set up his cauldron and began brewing something, a potion of some kind. He asked for Ambika to be sent in. Vyas had her sit at the table, and he got right down to business. All right, princess, let me explain what I'm doing here. I have some special magic powers. I can grant babies to childless single parents. I've never used it before, but Satyavati is my mom, and her smallest wish is my command. I must do everything I can so the empire has a successor. Ambika asked, if you're Satyavati's son, why don't you rule yourself? And what do you want with me? Vyas replied, I can't sit on the throne myself, princess, and that alone won't solve the succession problem. So, fast forward to the actual solution. In this cauldron, I'm making a potion. If you drink it, you shall have a child. Is that like the porridge in the Ramayana that Dasharath gave his queens back in episode 7? Asked Ambika. No, said Vyas. They don't make them like that anymore. You can't even find those on eBay. This is the only kind now. This is a single-use potion. And I'm afraid it tastes nothing like porridge. It's more like a mix of Vegemite and broccoli and bitter gourd. Absolutely nutritious, no doubt, but the opposite of tasty. All right, said Ambika, give me the potion. It's not complete yet, princess, said Vyas. What I need from you is to fill in this form. Ambika began reading through it. This is a lot of personal information. I don't know what my birth weight and my birth height were. Princess, it's not your birth weight or your birth height. It's the baby's, said Vyas. Oops, said Ambika, and began correcting the name and gender she had already filled in. This was starting to be fun for her. Ambika had led a sheltered life. Her life decisions were made first by her father, then by Bhishma, and then by Satyavati. Now, at last, she had some choice, some control over the person she was bringing into this world. She recalled the many fights with her parents in her teenage years, and how they had never let her experiment with a different hair color. Boldly, she entered in the other defining characteristics section. She filled out blonde. Her son would be blonde. He would be the Emperor of India, and people would be forced to accept his hair color. Only the space available for the other defining characteristics was so tiny, she had to squeeze it in somehow. She handed the form back to Vyas. She had asked for a few other things as well. Her son would be strong, and he would be able to crush an elephant with his bare hands. Vyas took the form and said, Normally, I'd read through every field and make sure there's no mistake. But I trust you, Princess. He held the form over the boiling cauldron and started a timer. Exactly a minute later, he put it away. Potion's ready. Drink up, Princess, he told Ambika, pouring it out into a tall glass. While Ambika slowly drank the potion, Vyas began casually reading the form. Ooh, nice name, he said. Dhritarashtra. When he got to the other defining characteristics, he stopped dead in horror. Princess, why? Relax, Vyas, said Ambika. He can always dye his hair black if he wants to. She had just finished the drink. Dye his hair? What are you talking about? You've asked for the baby to be blind, sightless. Ambika grabbed the form in horror. Sure enough, the one word she had squeezed into the tiny available space looked more like blind than blonde. It's all because of you and your stupid form, said Ambika. Who put such a long field name? Other defining characteristics? That's 30 spaces. And you left no space for me to squeeze in just 5 characters. What's done is done, said Satyavati. Ambika, you may leave us. But send in Ambalika. She did. But Vyas didn't think much of the idea of trying again with Ambalika. The potion is unlikely to be potent enough. And I have to reuse the cauldron, which is never a good idea. But Satyavati convinced him to try again. So he did. Ambalika was nervous. Very nervous. She had heard what this man did to Ambika. Her hands were shaking as she filled out the form. Vyas's unkempt appearance and body odor only made her more nervous. She completed the form finally, and this time Vyas read it. He did hold it over the cauldron as before, and when the potion was ready, he gave it to the princess to drink. When Ambalika left, Satyavati and Bhishma could see that Vyas was not happy. I warned you, Mum. I'm not reusing cauldrons anymore. Ambalika will have a son. Pandu, she's named him. He'll have his sight, no doubt. But he'll have an enemy all his life. And this isn't the kind of enemy that Bhishma can protect him from. Pandu will have health problems all his life. We must try again then, said Satyavati. After Dhritarashtra is born, Ambika will fill in the form again, properly this time. If you insist, Mum. But this will be the last time, and I'll need a fresh cauldron. Vyas decided to get one from his ashram. When he was back at the palace, there was confetti everywhere. There were banners of welcome baby Dhritarashtra and baby Pandu all over the palace. Vyas said hello to Satyavati. I'm doing this one last time, Mum. I have no more equipment for another try. I'll have to go to the mountains and pray to the gods for years before I can get more. Satyavati understood. At least the situation was a bit better than last time. She hoped Pandu's health and Dhritarashtra's sightlessness wouldn't prevent them from having healthy children of their own. She called Ambika over, but Ambika had PTSD. She did not want to meet this horrible Rishi. He couldn't even design a form properly, and because of that, her baby was blind. So she decided she would weasel out of the situation. She addressed her maid, who was standing next to her, fanning her with a large hand fan. Parishrami, I want to play a trick on that nasty man. I want you to pretend to be me. Suits me, princess. What do I have to do? Wear my clothes and jewelry, meet Vyas, fill in a form, said Ambika. Don't talk to him. I don't think he'll ask too many questions if you don't say a word. The maid was cool with that, if she got to keep the clothes and jewels, and if she got a hefty bonus next Diwali. That was totally acceptable to Ambika. So Parishrami got into the act. She also put on a veil, so Vyas wouldn't immediately catch on to the deception. Vyas did realize that the lady in front of him was not Ambika when he saw the handwriting on the form. But by then, it was too late. He dismissed this Ambika impersonator with no further questions. Satyavati came in next and asked, Well, how did it go? There's good news and bad news, Mum, said Vyas. Give me the good news first, said Satyavati. Mum, the boy, Vidur, will be absolutely healthy. He'll be the wisest person in the whole world. He'll be kind, and he would make a perfect ruler. But the bad news is that Vidur cannot sit on the throne. His mother is not Ambika. It's Ambika's maid, Parishrami. Are you sure? Asked Satyavati. How could you tell? Well, mother, it was really tricky. She was wearing Ambika's clothes and she hid her face. But in the end, I could tell anyway. She was a foot shorter than Ambika. Her voice sounded very different. And she kept asking if I needed anything from the kitchen. And the other very suggestive fact that she signed her name Parishrami on the form. Why? Why does this keep happening to me? Asked Satyavati. Where is the God of justice when you need him? Funny you should mention that, said Vyas. The God of justice is being born as this boy, Vidur. What? Asked Satyavati. Yup, true story. There was once this rishi who got a little unlucky. He was in his ashram, and some thieves chose to hide there after a heist at the palace. The king of the land assumed that the rishi was the ringleader, and he punished him in a terrible way. Now, the rishi forgave the king for that, but he did not forgive the GOJ, the God of Justice. The GOJ claimed that it was all payback because the rishi had accidentally crushed a bug by stepping on it when he was a child. Well, in a turn the tables kind of situation, the Rishi established that from then on, all sins committed before the age of 12 would be forgiven. And he cursed the GOJ to be born as a child in the human world. That child is Vidur. Satyavati thought about that and finally said, "So, when you say that Vidur is the wisest person in the world, he's also the same person who inflicted disproportionately severe punishment on someone because they crushed a tiny, inconsequential bug without even realizing it?" Vyas nodded and replied, "He sets a really low bar for the rest of the world, doesn't he? Well, I best be off. I have to get packing if I'm to go off and meditate for a few years. Maybe I'll come by and visit this family often." "Thank you for all you have done here, Vyas," said Satyavati, and bid him farewell. She had to reflect back on this episode. Yeah, there were some downsides to having a blind grandson and another with chronic health issues. But she was definitely more optimistic about the future than she had been at the beginning of the episode. She must arrange for the children's education. Even Vidur. He couldn't sit on the throne, but he would almost certainly advise whoever did. He definitely needed to learn a lot if he had been that bad at dispensing justice in his former life. At least, she thought, if she supervised their education, these boys might design forms properly and be careful not to reuse single use cauldrons. That's all I have for this week. A couple of notes. The text of the Mahabharat has a less sanitized version of what actually happened between Vyas and the princesses. Hint, it involved less magic. That version attributed Dhritarashtra's sightlessness to his mom's inability to keep her eyes open when facing Vyas. Vyas, in the epic he himself authored, freely admits to having a wild appearance and a strong body odor. There are some stories of Parashar and his grandpa, Vashist, which, as Vyas suggested, I'm certainly going to cover in a future episode. Also, in the text, Bhishma tells Satyavati a couple of stories to try and convince her to hire a rishi. And by a happy coincidence, Satyavati reveals that Vyas is her son. That's all for this week. In the next episode, we'll do a folktale again. This one is a story from the Deccan Plateau, a pretty large area covering most of southern India and lots of western India. It's an action packed story with lots of magic, deception, and confidence tricks, which makes total sense because the hero, or rather the anti hero of the story, is a jackal. If you have comments or suggestions, or if there are particular stories you would like to hear, please do let me know by leaving a comment or a review on the site sfipodcast.com or tweet at sfipodcast. You can also find me on Instagram and Facebook. Be sure to subscribe to the show to get notified automatically of new episodes. Thank you to all you listeners for your continued support and your feedback. The music is from purpleplanet.com. That's purple-planet.com. I'll see you next week.